I mean, it felt very natural. I love this part of the world so much. I love the history of the East. I mean, I tell a lot of people like, oh, you care for Iran so much. Why? Like, why? What made you care about it? The fact is, I love history, and I love the history of the East. I love non-Eurocentric history, and you can't walk in the world without looking at the influence of Persia. It's just kind of a given. And I think what really solidified for me my I think commitment to this cause is seeing how unfairly splintered from their identity and unfairly suppressed Iranians are. These are the living descendants of some of the greatest minds that history has ever seen, and they're suffering in silence, and it's just outrageous. This country, we've seen throughout history that the world is a better place when Iran is liberated. We've seen throughout history that the world is more powerful and more dynamic when this place is free and able to express themselves. And I think the world, once Iran is free, is going to see how much they benefit from a free Iran. And we're going to realize how amputated we have been from a place that, quite frankly, when people hear the word Iran, they should be proud. They shouldn't associate it with terrorism. And I can't wait for that day that Iranians get to reassert their truth, quite frankly. I think the most shocking thing is Western acceptance of Iranians' fate. I really believe that it's unfortunately very I want to say almost atrophied. The world is almost atrophied with how it looks at Iran. I think we're frozen at a certain point with how we perceive the Middle East, with how we perceive Iranians. And I think the most disconcerting and shocking thing was how many Westerners just accept that they think this is Iranian culture. They think this regime represents the Iranian people. And I think that's been the most shocking and upsetting thing, because it's so far from the truth. I mean, Iranians, you and I both know, and so many Iranians know, that Iranians have fought this regime and its ideology since the day they came to power in 1979. Muslim and non-Muslim have stood up against this regime. And I think that's the most shocking thing, is how apathetic so many Westerners are to this cause.
بعد از انقلاب در ایران، به خصوص بعد از ماجرای گروگانگیری سفارت آمریکا، تحریم‌های ایالات متحده علیه ایران بیشتر و بیشتر شد. بعدها می‌دونیم اروپایی‌ها هم تحریم‌های مشابهی وضع کردن، ولی به نظر نمیاد که خیلی در تغییر رفتار جمهوری اسلامی تاثیر گذاشته باشه. فکر می‌کنی چه کار دیگری غربی‌ها میتونن بکنن برای اثر گذاشتن بر رفتار جمهوری اسلامی؟
I almost think the world has, again, as I said, is very apathetic to the cause of Iran, very apathetic to the Iranian people. And I think, a lot of people just slap these sanctions on with no public condemnation, no public, like any other options for this regime to change their behavior. They just sort of slap these sanctions on and go about their business. This movement by the United Nations to expel the regime from the Women's Rights Commission is amazing, but the regime should never have been on that commission in the first place. And it's deeply offensive that the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is one of the child marriage capitals of the world, should have ever been on that committee. The West will slap on their sanctions, but embolden this regime as if it's a normal government, and I think that's one of the biggest things of this revolution is waiting for the West to formally condemn this regime, formally call them out for their gross human rights abuses, which I think the world has just sort of accepted this reality for Iranians, which again is the most shocking and upsetting part of this revolution. We've seen the apathy of the West. The UN Women's Rights Commission should never have had the Islamic Republic of Iran on it. It's offensive. And, Iranian women have been dying and sacrificing their lives for many years for the West to hear them. And finally, after so many years, they actually hear them. But the fact is, they never should have accepted it in the first place. They never should have been so willing to accept the reality that Iranians live every day. And I think that's, one of the biggest things that we hope to see is more Westerners blatantly calling out the illegitimate and disgusting Islamic Republic of Iran.
به نظر آدم بسیار لیبرالی میای، اما میبینم که هر از گاهی در شبکه‌های اجتماعی از چپ‌ها به خاطر عملکردشون در مورد ایران انتقاد میکنی. چه هست گلایت از اونها؟
I mean, a lot of regime propaganda has made its way into the left. You have well-meaning leftists who are now suddenly terrified that the West is going to invade Iran. No one's going to invade Iran. Nobody wants anyone to invade Iran, but they've digested these regime talking points because the regime has sort of cocooned itself in this anti-imperialist propaganda. Oh, the West, the dushman, it's really his fault, and I think they've cocooned themselves in a seed of truth. You know, we do know that the United States does do regime change wars. We do know that the United States does fund and aid and abet extremist groups that turn around and terrorize, you know, the populations that they are next to, such as, you know, the Taliban in Afghanistan, but also Pakistan. The United States has emboldened many of these groups. So, of course, there's a seed of truth in their propaganda, but nobody's threatening to come and invade Iran. No one's threatening to go to war with Iran. That would be disastrous for the world. And I think one of the most frustrating things is just watching leftists not being able to critically really read the facts of the situation and more or less go along with party dogma, which they're political points. They're not actually applicable to the situation. The situation is unfolding. The will and the voices of Iranian people are in real time telling us what we should do, and just blindly following these dogmas is not going to really help them where they are at right now on the front lines.
شاید این بزرگترین اعتراضات سراسری در ایران باشه، اما اولین بار نیست. در 40 سال گذشته ایرانی‌ها بارها اعتراضات مشابهی انجام دادن، ولی گلایه بسیاری این بوده که شاید اونطور که باید و شاید غربی‌ها ازشون حمایت نمی‌کردن. این بار به نظر میاد که یکم داستان متفاوت هست. سیاستمداران غربی چه در آمریکای شمالی چه در اروپا دارن بیشتر واکنش نشون میدن. میدونم که خودت در اینستاگرامت از سناتور ایالت آلاسکا که الان هم ساکن همونجا هستی خواستی که حمایت بکنه از زندانیان در ایران. میدونیم که بعضی از سیاستمداران اروپایی کفالت سیاسی بعضی از زندانیان رو بر عهده گرفتن. چقدر فکر میکنی گوش شنوا داشتن سیاستمداران آمریکایی تا اینجا؟
You know, I think unfortunately politicians have to be convinced that it's beneficial for them in order to advocate or involve themselves in anything like this. And you know, I think Lisa Murkowski is one of our senators here in Alaska. She's the most senior senator that we have in Alaska. And I chose her in particular because she does have a track record of standing alone. So, I mean, I hope that she can do that one more time. But really, it's been a matter of convincing politicians that this is beneficial to their long-term political goals in order to get involved. Unfortunately, that's the name of politics. We did have, you know, representatives in California who have drafted legislation that hopefully will be mirrored in other states, condemning the Islamic Republic, calling for the expulsion of their diplomats. We've seen things drafted like that in different states, but it did take a lot of work from the Iranian community. It did take a lot of energy and advocating from the Iranian community to get them to that point. Because I think a lot of politicians are, you know, terrified to put their head above the party precipice in regards to like, oh, will this look bad for, you know, my political career, you know, or is this how our party's voting in regards to the nuclear deal? I'm just trying to get to the human aspect of what we're all fighting for, which is human life. No politics, just there are innocent people who are about to be, unfortunately, murdered by this regime. And I did choose Lisa Murkowski because she has a track record of standing alone when it's very hard.
دیدم که از سازمان نایاک انتقادات زیادی در شبکه‌های اجتماعیت می‌کنی. می‌دونیم که ایرانیان مخالف جمهوری اسلامی زیادی هم هستن که انتقادات مشابهی دارن. خود اونها میگن که هدف اصلیشون جلوگیری از یک جنگ احتمالی بوده. چقدر خریدار نظر اونها هستی؟
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And they can take me to court again and lose another defamation case if they want, because they already did that. No, NIAC is absolutely preposterous. And if anything, even if they're not working for the regime, to sit there and advocate for the nuclear deal when the Iranian community the world over very starkly says the opposite, even if they're not working directly for the regime, that makes them a narcissistic and self-important organization they've made victims of themselves. The most disgusting tactic of NIAC right now is to claim smear campaigns. These aren't smear campaigns. These are the Iranians they claim to advocate for, asking them why they are still pushing the JCPOA when the clear and present will of the Iranian people on the ground and in the diaspora is to scrap the JCPOA and impose more monetary punishments on the regime. So for them to sit there and like, oh, these smear campaigns, these are Iranians asking simple questions. They're not smear campaigns. And it's just disgusting that they have turned around and manipulated this conversation so much to then make them, as they sit in the West, perfectly well and happy and in one piece, to make victims of themselves out of Iranians who are dying and getting shot at by the IRGC. It's just disgusting. It's disgusting and narcissistic at the very minimum. And at the very most, they are an arm of the regime, quite frankly. You cannot condemn the regime in one sentence and then in the next sentence advocate for their benefit, which is what the JCPOA is. The JCPOA is a legitimizing force for this regime at a time when we must be starving them out in the name of supporting the Iranian people. NIAC is just, quite frankly, disgusting and manipulative. And watching them cry wolf as the Iranian people stand up for what they believe in, calling themselves victims of smear campaigns, it's just disgusting. It's preposterous.